Today, we're going to talk about one of the most harrowing medical cases ever put on record. It's the story of a man named Hisashi Ouchi who went through an ordeal so unbelievably painful, it really pushes the limits of what we can even comprehend about human suffering. See, in one single catastrophic moment, the radiation he was exposed to didn't just damage him, it completely shattered every single chromosome in his body. The very blueprint for his existence, for every cell, was just gone.
And that is the central, haunting question of this entire story. How and why was he kept alive for almost 3 months? It's a journey into a medical nightmare that, believe it or not, all started with a simple shortcut. Okay, so let's set the scene. The date is September 30th, 1999. We're at a nuclear facility in a small village in Japan. The place is the JCO nuclear fuel plant in Tokaimura. They process uranium for power plants. And working there is our protagonist, Hisashi Ouchi, a 35-year-old technician just doing his job. But here's the problem. The company was way behind schedule and under a ton of pressure to meet its deadlines. So, to speed things up, the company started cutting corners. Big ones. They ditched automated, safe processes and had workers doing things by hand. We're talking about mixing highly radioactive materials manually. And to make quotas faster, they upped the concentration of uranium they were using. It was, quite literally, a recipe for disaster. And at 10:35 that morning, that disaster arrived. Ouchi and 2 of his colleagues were pouring a uranium solution into a big tank. The procedure was already unsafe, but then they made a final, fatal error. As they poured in the 7th bucket, they pushed the amount of uranium over its critical mass. A terrifying, brilliant blue flash erupted from the tank. It was a massive burst of gamma radiation, and all 3 men were standing right next to it. Ouchi immediately collapsed, but he was conscious. What he couldn't possibly know was that that flash of blue light had just condemned him to a fate that many would say is worse than death. And to really understand why, we need to quickly look at the science. Okay, the key measurement here is something called a sievert. It basically tells you the biological damage radiation does to a person. Now, to give you some perspective, just remember that nuclear plant workers have a very strict yearly limit that they absolutely cannot go over. All right, get ready for this, because the numbers are just mind-blowing. The annual safe limit for a worker is 20 millisieverts. In that single instant, Hisashi Ouchi absorbed 17,000 millisieverts. That's not a typo. It's 850 times the annual safe limit, all delivered in less than a second. It was the highest dose of radiation any human had ever been exposed to in history. His coworkers were also hit with absolutely unsurvivable levels. Masato Shinohara got 10,000 millisieverts, and their supervisor, Yutaka Yokokawa, got 3,000. Any one of these doses is considered fatal. But his was on a completely different planet. So now we follow Ouchi to the hospital. And this is where the story gets truly difficult, as we witness how this insane dose of radiation began to systematically dismantle his body, piece by agonizing piece. You know, when he first got to the hospital, he just looked like he had a bad sunburn. He was talking. But on the inside, his body was already disintegrating. It didn't take long for the medical team to make a horrifying discovery. His chromosomes were shattered, gone. They were in completely uncharted medical territory. So this is the most important point to understand. Without DNA, there's no cellular regeneration. No new skin cells, no new blood cells, no new muscle tissue, nothing. His body had completely lost the ability to repair itself in any capacity. He was, biologically speaking, already gone. His body just hadn't caught up yet. Within just a week, his skin started to literally fall off. They couldn't even use medical tape on him anymore because there was no skin for it to stick to. It got to the point where his muscles actually started to separate from his bones. The level of suffering is just impossible to imagine. He was in constant, excruciating pain. His organs were breaking down. Just to give you an idea, one of the most harrowing details is this. Every single time he blinked, his eyes would bleed. His body was essentially leaking. Every single day, he was losing up to 10 liters of fluid through his non-existent skin. That meant he needed constant, massive transfusions of blood and fluids around the clock just to keep him alive. Well, after almost 2 months of this, on day 59, his heart gave out.
The doctors, wanting to learn everything they could from this unprecedented case, worked on him for 70 minutes and brought him back. But they only brought him back to more agony. And this is where they hit an ethical wall. They realized their efforts were just prolonging his suffering. It got to the point where they had to have an unthinkable conversation with the family and ask for permission to let him go the next time his heart failed. On the 83rd day, Hisashi Ouchi's heart stopped one last time. His terrible ordeal was finally over. But the questions about how this man-made catastrophe could have ever happened were just beginning. So who was responsible? Well, the story kind of splits here. On one hand, you had the company, JCO, which clearly disregarded safety protocols and pushed its workers to cut corners for profit. But on the other hand, some reports focused on the workers themselves for making that final critical mistake. In the end, 6 company officials were charged with negligence, and the plant lost its license. But the debate over who was truly at fault continues. But regardless of who was specifically to blame, this accident became a national trauma for Japan. It blew the lid off a deeply flawed safety culture in a country that prides itself on precision and safety. The whole thing led to a complete overhaul of the country's nuclear safety laws, stricter rules, mandatory emergency drills, and a whole new focus on a safety-first culture. It was a brutal, unforgettable lesson written in one man's unimaginable suffering. Hisashi Ouchi's story is an extreme and, frankly, terrifying example of what can go wrong at the sharp end of technology. It really forces us to confront a difficult question. What's the true human cost of our ambition? And when we decide to cut corners for the sake of progress, who is it that ultimately pays the price?